Hello, welcome to my channel. This is What If Naruto Saves Karin from a Bear in the Forest of Death Part 9. Check out the author in the description and the fanfic, and have a nice day.
Karin found herself stretching in the light of the afternoon sun as she left the hospital. She and Naruto had finally been cleared to leave and were now walking down the streets of the Leaf, their destination unknown at present. "So, what do you want to do first, Naruto?" He crossed his arms and looked up to the sky. "I kind of want to see what Jiraiya-sensei left at my place, but I also want to talk to Iruka-sensei about what happened with Mizuki. And I need to go see that woman at the ceiling R&D place about getting Byaku's mask remade, and then pick up some books from the library about the fourth Hokage." Karin glanced towards him to see that there was a sullen look in his eyes that clouded them over. Learning who his parents truly were may have answered questions he long since had, but they also put a weight on his shoulders in trying to live up to them and doubt whether or not he could do it. His eyes were a lot more radiant when he was happy to her. "How about we get something to eat first?" she asked, hoping to distract him from the doubts haunting him. "Then we can decide what we'll do." His eyes regained some of their luster as the suggestion brought a smile to his face. "Then let's head to Ikaraku's. Ayame was worried about you since she hadn't seen you in a while, and I haven't had some of their ramen since before we left the village. I hope she's doing well." Not since the finals had Karin seen the older woman who seemed to consider herself an older sister to him, a feeling that was mutual considering that Naruto looked a bit happier too at the thought of eating his favorite dish and seeing someone close to him. "That's good enough for now," Karin supposed as she followed behind him as they made their way towards the food stand. He needed to take his mind off of everything right now. Yet when they arrived, Naruto's cheerful expression turned to one of surprising disbelief as he found 2 seats at his favorite eating place occupied. "What are you doing here?" Naruto asked in a heated voice, pointing a finger to the Inuzuka boy who was in the process of eating a bowl of beef ramen. If it offended the boy, it didn't show as he finished slurping up strands of noodles hanging out of his mouth and pointed his chopsticks towards the little ninja pup that was on the seat next to him. "I thought I'd swing by after getting paid since Akamaru likes the place and the food's pretty good." "Awa, you're sweet, Kiba-kun," Ayame said from behind the counter before she flashed the Uzumaki pair a smile. "Come on over, you two." Naruto took a seat next to the ninja pup, giving it a pat on the head when it yipped at him, and then addressed Ayame. "Where's Tuchai?" "Handling some business across town," she said, "though he has been asking about you. Where have you two been?" "Smells like they've been in the hospital," Kiba said before Naruto could answer, earning a glare from him. "What? The scent is still fresh." "You two didn't get hurt, did you?" Ayame asked. Naruto's glare lingered on the Inuzuka before he answered her. "We just ran into some trouble on a mission." It was obviously an understatement if Karin ever heard one, but he didn't want to worry her. "We're both cleared now, so it's fine. Isn't that right, Karin-chan?" "Yeah," Karin said, forcing a smile to ease any concerns she may have had. "It was just a few scratches and Naruto kept me safe the entire time. There's nothing to worry about at all now." "HRM, she looked at Karin suspiciously with a raised brow and her hands on her hips. "I can usually tell when Naruto's lying, but you're harder to read." Her expression relaxed. "Well, since you're both here now and look okay, I'll buy it. Now what will you both have on the house?" "Can I have a bowl of the usual?" Naruto asked. "Sure thing." She then turned to Karin. "And what'll you have?" Karin looked up at the menu to see what they had to offer. The most appealing-looking one had shredded vegetables, eggs, and seafood. "I guess I'll have the one on the left. It looks good." With a slight bob of her head, the brown-haired older girl began to cook for them while Naruto and Kiba held a conversation. Karin mostly stayed out of it. There was nothing she could contribute to it, so she patiently waited for her meal. "So have you found a place to stay?" Ayame asked when she finished Karin's order first. "Or are you living with Naruto now?" "No, I've got a place now, It's not that I would mind living with him, but his place isn't really meant to have more than one person living there, and I should give him his space. I suppose you're right. She set the bowl down in front of her. A girl does need her personal space, after all. Yeah, Karin trailed off as she recalled the shared home she had with Anko. Guilt snaked its way down her throat and into the pit of her stomach when she thought about the final time she'd seen the woman, forcing her to shake her head in an effort to push it aside for now and enjoy her meal. "Come back again," Ayame said cheerfully as Naruto, Karin, and Kiba departed from the stall after finishing their food. It hadn't taken them long to eat, and they had other things to tend to, so they were off. Once they were out of view, Ayame sighed softly and then proceeded to go back and check on the stock. "Ayame ni?" The familiar voice stilled her legs. She turned to find Naruto standing there and then peeked over the edge of the counter to see that he was alone. "Naruto, I thought you left with the others." "I'm a shadow clone," he said. "The original me is with Karin-chan." "Oh, right. I remember those from the competition." She idly wondered how useful it would be to have multiple versions of herself running around the shop for when things got busy, or to have them do the work entirely while she studied on new meals to add to the menu, since she'd hoped to one day expand her father's business into a full restaurant someday. "Is there something wrong?" "The original me wanted to ask you something, since we figured you'd know about this kind of stuff, but not with the others around." He looked bashful as he spoke, which was unusual for him. It immediately roused her curiosity, so she invited him to come in and talk to her about it. The clone entered into the back of the shop and then told her that Karin-chan had confessed that she fell in love with him. The revelation had left him unsure of what to do. "Okay, I see why you'd want to talk about this," she said from her perch against the wall as she finished listening to him. "I imagine you don't have a lot of experience with that sort of thing?" He shook his head. "I've been putting it off since she told me during the finals, but I think that I should answer her after everything we've gone through." "During the finals? Was that when she kissed you on the cheek?" "No, it was after the match with Neji." He looked down to the floor and a blush came over his face. "She kissed me on the lips then. It felt different from when she kissed me on the cheek. A lot different. Some kids are surprisingly forward these days." She leaned down a bit and looked Naruto in the eyes. "She hasn't been pressuring you for an answer or anything else, has she?" Naruto shook his head again slowly. "She's only asked that I don't abandon her, but other than that she hasn't asked me to give her an answer or anything. Not that I was going to abandon her at all. I wouldn't do that." "Of course you wouldn't. There's no one I know who values the people around him as much as you." She rubbed his hair and smiled reassuringly. "Can you tell me how you feel about her right now?" "I care about her a lot," he said. "And she's been there for me a lot too. I want to respond to that somehow, but at the same time I'm afraid that if I do something wrong that I'll lose even that. It's scary, you know?"
Well, it's good that you don't want to rush beyond what you feel comfortable doing right now, but a relationship isn't just one-sided. Ayame stood up straight, placed her hands on her hips, and puffed out her chest. A girl likes feeling special, so you should do something to show that she does mean more to you. That's how you need to respond to her.
"But I don't really know how to do anything for her other than be next to her," Naruto said. Ayame stated the simple solution. "Then take her on a date." Naruto grew pensive at the suggestion. "I used to ask Sakura-chan on dates all the time, but I really didn't have much of an idea what that would consist of other than visiting different places and eating together. And I did all that with Karin-chan before she confessed, so would that really be enough?" "Just because you did it before doesn't mean it won't have any meaning." Ayame smiled and held a finger up. "In fact, I bet she loved that most of all. Spending time with someone you care about is one of the best things you can do for them. Do you know why?" His lips and brows upturned as he seriously thought about it. Ultimately, he shook his head. "I can't put it into words, but when I think about it, I feel like you're right." That's because time is one of the few things you can't get back. Every day, every minute is precious because there's no telling how long you'll live. So when you give someone your full attention and time, they're getting something from you that's irreplaceable. Like right now, for instance, I'm giving you advice and time instead of brushing you off because you're someone I care about. Realization colored his eyes. He understood now that even if people don't realize it on their own, it was how they showed that they cared for others. Then a date might be good since we won't be leaving the village for a while. I just need to think about what's involved in it. Just do whatever you feel is right here. She set her hand on his chest over his heart. As sweet as you are, I'm sure she'll really be happy with whatever you decide. The words of encouragement made him relax and smile. Thanks for the advice, Ayame. I knew I could count on you. Anytime, Naruto. She gave him a brisk hug. Tell me how it goes when you do decide, okay? He nodded as she released him and then vanished in a slight poof of smoke. Ayame stared at the spot for a moment before crossing her arms. She couldn't help but smile fondly as she recalled how he'd grown since they first met. I hope it goes well for him. Ayame's advice remained in Naruto's mind as he and Karin entered the ceiling R&D building. There he met with Naruto again, who headed the research into the masks and what they entailed. She took the news of Byaku's destruction better than Naruto would have expected. It's a waste that the original was destroyed along with whatever knowledge it had, but it's better than losing either of you since the divine beasts can be replaced. Given the trouble you had in the land of honey, I'm just happy that's the only loss. Naruto blinked. You know about that? She nodded, the act of which caused her ponytail to waver. The information wasn't exactly restricted, and when my boyfriend came home with injuries, he explained that his trip to the land of honey had complications. Boyfriend? Naruto took a second to recall what was said during the trip, a bit of small talk between him and the seasoned Chunin that were accompanying him on the way there, and the hour-long lecture on how a sealing formula operated. You mean Okai? We studied the sealing arts together, and there was a connection there, but I chose to work here full-time while he chose to enter into a different department. On a technical level, I'm more familiar with the mechanics of how various sealing scripts work. On a practical level, he's the one who uses them in the field. Naruto recalled the vapor that Okai had used when it chased his clones around until he recognized them. Like the poisonous smoke snake thing he did? Technically, it can work with all sorts of gases as long as the volume they take up and density is within the range of what the sealing script was designed to handle with the space of the slip. It basically takes the stored gas and layers a thin membrane of chakra over it as it's released to allow him to control it as a sort of appendage. It's much simpler and cost-effective than threading his chakra through each particle and trying to control it like that. Is he doing okay? Naruto asked. He had left so abruptly, and it was in bad taste given that it was without notice. But Karin was in danger, and he hadn't a second to waste. He's doing fine enough to keep busy, so you don't need to worry. She rose to her feet with a huff. Anyway, I'll put in the order for the mask to be reproduced for you, and it should be ready in a few days. During that time, we'll have you both try to converse with the other masks so we can learn more about the divine priests and priestess. I believe that using them we can unravel the mysteries of the divine gods. Are they really that complicated compared to Byaku? Karin asked. The sealing work on the divine beasts was amazing, but simplistic compared to the divine priests and priestess. And those pale in comparison to the divine gods. I can't even imagine what they're capable of. The thought actually makes me excited. Naruto could see that it did from how she was holding her arms and shivering. He still wasn't used to that. You said that the priests and priestess had over 30 layers before. Does that mean the gods have even more? Oh yes, from what we've gathered so far, we estimate there are around 104 layers, and counting. It must have taken your ancestors years to carve them all so precisely onto such a small space. I imagine that they had specialists who did that sort of thing. In fact, that's one of the questions I want you to ask them. Karin looked mildly intrigued, brows folded in slightly as she held a finger to chin in thought. She had always expressed an interest in learning about their clan's past, so who better than they? That does sound interesting. But the chakra needed would require that we take the masks to charge them over the course of days. Not necessarily if our latest sub-projects work. She spun on the soles of her feet and made for the door. Follow me. Karin sent Naruto an aside glance as the older woman began to giggle excitedly. He could only shrug his shoulders before they followed after her. She led them further inside of the building and then down a flight of stairs to a room below that was divided into two parts. One was an observation room, with glass panes and equipment Naruto wasn't familiar with. The other was a white room covered in ceiling script that ran from the floor to the walls, with the focal points being two different circles with a large sigil inside of them. "So, what do you think?" Naruto asked. "We had a meeting with a Yamanaka on some of our ideas on how to make a spiritual link audible to everyone. Between that and a couple of us, we're able to get this set up. When you activate the masks and remain inside of the circles, we can hear what they're saying in theory. Pretty cool, right?" Naruto cautiously looked around at the room. "You really planned this out, huh?" "Yep." She walked over to the control panel and then took out square slips that were on them. "And these little beauties are designed to absorb your yang chakra. All you have to do is channel into them before you go to bed, and when you come back, bring them all. We'll then feed them to one of the divine priest's masks and use it to sustain the construct while you converse with it." It sounded simple enough. Naruto took them and placed them into his pocket before they took their leave. Naru wished them well and escorted them out of the building, leaving the pair once more on the streets of the Leaf. It was only then that Karin spoke. That woman was. She took a moment to try to come up with a proper way to put her feelings into words. "She's really enthusiastic." Naruto couldn't help but nod as he recalled their first meeting. "At least she didn't hug you to the point where you could barely breathe." Karin's looked mildly surprised at that bit of information. "She did that?" "She was really enthusiastic." He laughed sheepishly while scratching the back of his head, wisely deciding not to bring up that the embrace was soft or the part where she mentioned locking them up until they had children. Even the thought of spending her life working on it doesn't seem to bother her too much. That's dedication for you. Karin looked a bit wistful at that. "I won't argue with you there. So many things have been lost due to time and war, so it's probably good that she's enthusiastic about it." That said, the two continued their walk throughout the streets of the Leaf side by side. The sound of splintering wood and the crackle of electricity filled the air of the training ground within the Uchiha district at the edge of the village. Sasuke watched as the tree tumbled over, the lightning covering his hand fading as he panted with hard and heavy breaths. The tree that had weathered the ages and years had been toppled by the anger that had built up within his chest like a flame that wouldn't stop burning. They had trapped him within the village, forbidding him from going out on missions until further notice. Worse, Kakashi was away right now, and there was no one else who could teach him how to use his Sharingan to its fullest. He clenched his fist in anger. "How am I supposed to get stronger at this rate?" "Ah, you shouldn't be so violent to nature as a means to vent your aggression," a voice whispered from behind him. He turned, flinging a trio of shuriken towards the source in one swift motion. Each one buried their points into a tree, but there was no body to be found. "Nice to see your reflexes haven't dulled since we last talked." This time it came from in front of him louder. Sasuke's head snapped around, fingers tight on a chakra blade as he drew it from his back pouch and held it at the ready. He didn't drop it, even when he recognized the figure now in front of him. "You're supposed to be dead." Orochimaru smiled. "Death is but a mere inconvenience to me." The Sharingan flared to life in the wake of Orochimaru's presence. A swirl of colors greeted Sasuke immediately, a discrepancy within the man's chakra compared to when they last met in the Forest of Death. Since he never forgot what he saw as long as he had his Sharingan active, it stuck out. Your chakra is different. Perceptive. The snake Sanin smirked. You've gotten better with noticing such things. Let's just say that it is a consequence of my demise and resurrection. Normally, I would stay in my lab until it settled, but I wanted to see how well you've progressed in my absence. However, should you need further proof that I am who I am. Sasuke sucked in a sharp breath in surprise as the cursed seal reacted beneath the seal placed over it when the pale man pointed to him. Markings crawled like ivy over his neck and collarbone, leaving Sasuke with little doubt it was him. How are you even still alive? One of the fruits of my research has been ways to break the cycle of death. I once desired to do the same for the village, but the old fool saw my methods as too unsavory. So no matter how many times I am killed, I can be resurrected and try again to accomplish my goals. Considering his point proven, Orochimaru dropped his hand and the seal went inert as he looked around at the training ground. Such wanton destruction seems a bit excessive, but I suppose it's understandable with your abrupt and unexplained imprisonment within the village. They just said that Kakashi was on a mission and that I wouldn't be allowed to leave until I got express permission from the Hokage, Sasuke said. They didn't give me a reason why, but I'm guessing it's because you came back and they think it'll keep me safe. A foolish reason when you consider that I'm standing right in front of you at this very moment. If I desired to take you, there would be nothing they could do to stop me. He chuckled when he saw that caused Sasuke to frown defensively. Not that I was implying that you would be easy for me to take, merely that the village has no way to do as they claim. Another example would be how your brother and Kisame, 2 members of Akatsuki, entered the village, maimed 3 of the elites among their forces, and then left. Tempering himself, Sasuke did recall his brother was talking to someone who was dressed the same during their encounter. The shark-looking man. What is Akatsuki and why are they helping him? They're a group of S-class shinobi who have abandoned their villages and act as mercenaries, Orochimaru explained. Or at least that's how they market themselves. The truth is a bit more complicated in that they gather information on Jinchuriki, such as that Gaara child and your little teammate. I suspect they intend to hunt them down soon. A jolt of surprise ran through Sasuke at that, and then things started making a lot more sense. Itachi had made it clear he intended to return after bonds of friendship had been fostered while he thought Sasuke was unconscious. That must have been what he planned to do. He was going to come back for Naruto in order to get him to attain the next level of his Sharingan and accomplish his mission at the same time. Orochimaru waited for Sasuke to digest that in his head before he spoke again. Tell me something, Sasuke-kun. You've seen the gap between you and Itachi once more, so I ask you this question. Do you intend to continue to seeking vengeance against him? I will kill him, Sasuke said immediately, burning hatred in his voice. That will never change. My clan will be avenged. I have no doubt you desire to do so, but I'm asking if you believe that will be allowed to. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at the implication that he needed to be allowed to do what he was obligated to as the sole survivor of their clan. For an Uchiha, one was supposed to honor their family and fallen. There was nothing more important than that. I don't need permission to do anything. The Sheikh Sanin shook his head. Leaving aside the fact that you are a shinobi of this village and thus bound to the Hokage's words, you are the last of your clan. Do you really think that they would allow such an encounter when the first sign of my resurrection they squirrel you away without telling you anything? You would be lucky if word ever reached you of him being sighted, let alone being allowed to face Itachi. Sasuke clenched his fist hard enough that his arm began to tremble. They hadn't even told him when Itachi showed up before. It was only because of a slip of the tongue that he knew. I don't care what they will allow me to do. I'm going to make Itachi pay for killing my family and everyone in my clan. No one is getting in the way of that. Orochimaru looked into the pair of Sharingan unwavering, as though looking for any trace of doubt in his words. He clearly liked what he saw because his lips turned upwards as he reached behind his back and pulled out 2 scrolls. "That's just what I wanted to hear. Take these then." Sasuke caught the 2 scrolls lazily tossed his way. "What are these?" "The first is a temporary contract of sorts to the snake summonings that I use," he explained. "I'm sure that you know by now that there is a barrier of sorts around the village that detects when one leaves the grounds or enter it through ordinary means. If you sign it, then you'll be able to perform one summoning, and they will be able to reverse summon you in turn. Through this method, you will be able to leave the village should you choose to abandon it to seek out your vengeance without them being aware, ensuring that you aren't simply dragged back minutes after your departure. If you wish to establish a more permanent contract that can be arranged at a later date." Sasuke confirmed as much by opening it up and viewing it himself. "And the second?" "A storage scroll containing everything you would need to elevate my little gift to you to the next level," Orochimaru said. "I would suggest going through all the details beforehand and following them precisely, should you choose to unlock the power within it." Sasuke looked at him suspiciously as he slipped the scrolls into his back pouch. "Why are you just giving these to me? What do you gain from this?" "That is a good question," Orochimaru said as he tapped on his chin in thought. "I can give you a number of reasons for doing so. For example, I have my own grievances against your brother and think it would be excellent if he died by your hands. And I do take some pleasure in preserving and documenting rare bloodlines that are on the verge of extinction. However, I don't really think that it matters all that much what reason I give you, since you only seek to whatever power you can get your hands on to deal with your brother." "Is that a problem?" Sasuke asked. "There's no shame in desiring to be stronger in this world, Sasuke-kun." A sinister chuckle echoed from Orochimaru's throat as his body began to turn into mud and fall apart. "I won't judge you for the means by which you accomplish your goal, as it would make me a hypocrite. Until that day comes when you decide to leave this village behind and come to me, I'll simply settle for watching you grow from the shadows. Don't disappoint me." Soon there was nothing left but mud and silence in the clearing, leaving Sasuke alone with his thoughts as the words of the snake Sannin slithered their way into his heart. While he didn't trust what the man said, he did need all the power he could muster if he was going to carry out his vengeance. It still left the scrolls in his pouch feeling heavy. At the same time that Sasuke was gifted by the snake Sannin, a low rumble left Naruto's throat as he looked over the information he was bequeathed by the Toad Sage while he was absent. It contained information he'd gathered on Naruto's parents and homeland, as well as a few scrolls on other things. That unfortunately included homework, for lack of a better term. He had to do research on some of the politics of the village and things of that nature. They were things a Hokage needed to know, and while Naruto supposed it was better to learn about it now rather than later, it didn't change the fact that it was really boring and took him effort to get through. "It feels like it's making my brain ache." "Suck it up," one of his clones said as it looked through one of the technique scrolls that was left behind. It was an invisibility technique of some kind that would aid him in escaping fights that it would be better to retreat from, rather than stick it out to where he'd need the nine-tailed fox's chakra to deal with. His access to that chakra was still sealed anyway. If Naruto had to be honest, he was hoping he might find the fourth Hokage's technique within it. But Jiraiya left a note saying that while he would have left what he knew of his father's Flying Thunder God technique, which was little given that his home and notes were destroyed during the fox's rampage, he was afraid that Naruto would accidentally teleported himself into a wall without someone overseeing him. That happened during a testing with a shadow clone, apparently. The original Naruto turned from his perch on his bed towards the clone and shot him a glare. "You don't get to complain. You're the one who gets to look at the technique while I get glorified academy work." The clone shrugged. "Not my fault you picked paper when you should have picked rock." The original's eyes narrowed until he was leering at his clone. "You do remember I can dispel you, right?" "True, but we know you won't." A smug grin formed on the clone's face. After all, that would mean you couldn't win an argument with yourself and decided to take the easy way out. And all the other clones you make will know it too, so you're stuck with it. Neither one of you gets to complain, another clone chimed in from the table, whose head was buried in a book that the original picked up from the library after dropping Karin off at her place. I'm the one stuck here trying to figure out how to do this date thing, and the book you picked out on dating a kunoichi might not have been the wisest choice. I now know more about the ways that I can be killed for so much as saying the wrong thing to a woman and having it misinterpreted into a threat or double meaning than a man should know. Not that we can do most of the things in this book for a number of reasons. Like what? Asked the original. He had picked up the book because he was trying to follow Ayame's advice and create an experience for her to remember, but he wanted it to be special as well. Granted, he just skimmed it since he wanted to get home rather than give it an in-depth review. The second clone closed the book and counted off on his fingers. Like creating a block of stone with an earth technique and then carving it into her likeness using only a butter knife and wind chakra, or using a fire technique to cook something to perfection while putting on a performance blindfolded, or using a genjutsu to create a fancy illusion. We don't know how to do any of that. No, but it did give me some ideas on what we could do, the second clone said. You remember that night she taught us how to do the water walking exercise. The original Naruto rubbed his chin as he thought back to that moment. He could vividly recall her scent and the warmth of her body against his as they danced beneath the pale moon. Yeah, how could I forget? We could do something like that, having dinner on the lake's surface with floating candles and everything. That'll work, he agreed. I can reserve a practice field and then have a bunch of clones make sure that it's clean and tidy by the time night comes around. Maybe even have a few disguised like servers in a fancy restaurant. But how exactly do you plan to stay afloat while having dinner? Asked the first clone. We want her attention to be on enjoying herself, not concentrating on trying not to sink or risking running out of chakra. And then we'd need to deal with any bugs flying around in the area, the other clone added, and find something nice to cook, that or take out. The original sighed as he rubbed the back of his head. His clones were making good points. He then looked at his clock. All right, it's getting late and I've got to do the seal thing for the mask, so. The second clone jumped up and snapped his fingers as inspiration struck. Then, instead of explaining it, the clone grinned and then willingly dispersed itself. The thought process that branched from the others was instantly inserted into their minds as the chakra making it up returned to them. That could work, the remaining clone said. I mean, we'd have to ask around a lot, but it could work. The original nodded. We'll do that in the morning after we visit Gara. For now, though, write up the list of things we need and people we need to talk to. I'm going to take a shower. The next day, the rattle of chakra chains filled the air as Karin swung them around her with a spin, whereupon they met with the incoming kunai and deflected them. She then brought her arms around while extending the length produced from her palms and then angled them downwards. The ends of the chains, which were sharp points meant to penetrate, speared towards the kunoichi standing opposite of her. The kunoichi of teen guy Tenten flipped to the side and out of the way of the initial attempt, leaving them to penetrate the ground harmlessly. But the serpentine chains quickly forced themselves out from beneath her, having tunneled through the ground and would have entwined her if she hadn't dodged again. She quickly reached into her pouch and then threw down a smoke bomb to obscure her from view. It was useless. Karin's mind's eye could track her chakra down and allowed her to manipulate her chains towards Tenten. They snaked her way and tried to encircle her until she recognized the throwing motion being made right before a flurry of shuriken burst from the smoke towards her. Karin barely managed to duck in time, only for something hard to hit her on the head. Oh! She broke off the chains and rubbed her head where she'd been hit. A glance to the ground showed what had hit her. It was a practice stick, the kind used for sparring in place of a short sword, with a wire wrapped around it. If this had been a chain sickle, it would have buried itself right into your skull. Tenten said as she emerged from the smoke and pulled on the wire, sending it back to her as she took up a starting stance again. If your focus is on manipulating the chains to chase someone down, you'll be vulnerable to projectiles or being blindsided from behind or above. Only try something like that if you're ambushing them from a safe location. Got it. Karin entered into the same stance. They had been going at it since this morning, when Sakura had introduced her to the weapon enthusiast. Once Tenten gave the nod to begin again, Karin thrust her arm forward while launching a chain long enough to cross the distance with a weight on the end. It was dodged as Tenten ducked off to the side. Then she countered by pulling out a sealing slip and injecting chakra into it. From the sealing script emerged a spray of senbin towards Karin, the steel rain spreading wide as it crossed the distance. Karin was forced to dodge by diving out of the way and into a roll. Or at least she intended to until her arm was jerked back, and she fell short, landing on her side rather than a neat roll. She winced as she looked to see that Tenten had shoved a kunai through a link in the chain and then into the ground, pinning it into place. "Don't leave your chain extended when it's connected to your body," Tenten lectured. "Someone as strong as Guy Sensei or Lee would be able to send you flying with a tug just from how strong they are. Now keep going." Karin dismissed that chain while swinging her other hand around. Another chain emerged from the palm and lashed out, forcing Tenten to jump back out of range. Rising to her feet, Karin retracted it to a more manageable length to avoid a repeat of what just happened. The practice session continued until later that evening. Steel littered the training ground by the time that Tenten called an end to it, and they started retrieving them, as was etiquette for the use of the field. They had roughly gathered them all up when Sakura returned with Naruto in tow. "Did you have a nice training session?" Naruto asked. Karin nodded. "I've got the basics down at least." "You'll have to develop your own style from here on," Tenten said in response to that. "Just remember to keep the length of the chains down to something manageable. It's easier and quicker to control that way. Using momentum allows you more freedom of movement, and you'll be able to surprise them when you do control it." "I understand," Karin said, giving her a slight bow. "Thank you for doing this for me." "It's not a problem. We kunoichi need to stick together after all, and I got the chance to see how to deal with a censor, so it was a fair exchange." That said and done, Naruto, Sakura, and Karin made their way back towards the residential area of the village. Along the way, Karin did her best not to look suspicious as Naruto and Sakura exchanged whispers with one another. She expected they would have some secrets between them and didn't want to seem pushy with him after telling Sakura how she felt about him, so she bottled her questions until they reached a crossroads. That was where Sakura split off to head elsewhere, after sighing and then giving Naruto a nod. Once the two Uzumaki were alone, Naruto asked, "Karin-chan, do you have something planned this weekend?" "Not that I know of," she said. "Is there something you want me to do, like cook?" "Nah, I've just got a little surprise planned for you," he said with a grin on his face. "It's just going to take me a bit to get it ready by then, but I'm sure you'll like it." The way he framed that did leave her curious, but what that surprise was remained unsaid as he finished escorting her home. No matter. She could wait until then to find out, and she was sure if it was something he thought of it would be something she liked. The night air felt chill against Karin's face as it whipped past her unseen. It was the weekend and Naruto had asked her to join him for dinner, which seemed simple enough. But then he stated that it was a special place that he wanted to take her to using Suzaku, and asked that she wear a blindfold and not use her mind's eye to avoid ruining the surprise. That set off some alarms in her head. She couldn't fathom why he'd ask her to do that, but the use of her mind's eye prior to accepting revealed that it was him, and he wasn't under the influence of foreign chakra. So she put her trust in her clansman and accepted his terms. Still, it was unnerving to be flying blindly like this. A weight settled in her stomach as she tried not to panic and fought against the instinctive desire to activate her mind's eye while her physical eyes were blindfolded. Instead, she tightened her hold on the warm figure nestled against her, and ensured that she was still anchored to the vermilion bird through chakra. "We're almost there," Naruto said with his voice raised to be heard over the rushing wind that whipped at their hair. "I promise you'll like it." "I'll take your word for it," Karin said, holding him tighter. It was less out of fear this time and more because he felt warm to the touch. That, and if she was being honest with herself, she enjoyed the feeling of comfort it brought without putting any pressure on him. Their flight continued on for a few minutes until she felt a shift in the air and gravity. They were descending. Suzaku landed softly and then lowered itself onto the ground for them to unmount. "I guess we must be here now." Karin released the anchor she had to it and moved to lower herself. She hadn't even set a foot on the ground before she felt herself being lifted into Naruto's arms, one around her back and the other beneath her knees. "Eh?" "Let me carry you until we reach it," he said. "It won't take a minute." Whatever this surprise is, it must be elaborate, she thought to herself as she felt heat pooling in her cheeks while being held like this. She kept silent as he moved forward, but the sound of water shifting underfoot with each step led her to believe that they were in the middle of a pond or lake. And there was a scent, a hint of sweetness tinging it to the point where it slightly tickled her nose. What could he be planning? The unasked question was answered when Naruto eventually came to a stop and set her down in what felt like a chair. "We're here. You can take the blindfold off." She lowered it from her eyes and rested it around her neck before reaching for her glasses, which were perched on the collar of her long-sleeved lavender blouse. It ran long down to her black pants to cover up her skin entirely. The moment she put them on and her vision cleared, a surprised gasp slid out of her mouth as she took in the surroundings. Dark water stretched out around them, small lily pads with candles in paper lanterns burning the sweet incense as they drifted left and right. Motes of light hung in the air like suspended raindrops, glittering in intervals between stone columns, rising out the water marked with the crest of their clan. The stars above were shining brightly as well, like diamonds woven into the night sky. "Was this the surprise you mentioned?" she asked, looking back towards Naruto. He had dressed up somewhat in a different outfit than his usual jumpsuits, instead wearing a dark shirt and black pants. Next to him was a table that had a serving platter with a lid on it and candles burning next to it. "Yeah, well," he looked off to the side, a nervous smile on his face as he gathered himself. "I wanted to do something special, so I called in a few favors and arranged for a date." There was a moment of silence as his words registered. Then she felt heat bubbling up in her chest and then rising to her head as she blushed, completely flustered. "This is a date?" "If that's okay," Naruto quickly added. "I wanted it to be a surprise for you, so I couldn't ask if it was fine. But—" "No, it's fine, it's fine." She rose to her feet. "I mean, if you had told me ahead of time, I probably would have told you not to go out of your way for me. But since I thought we were just eating together casually, I just threw on something appropriate for going out in public. If I had expected something like this, I would have done something with my hair, or maybe spray on perfume, or wear something more attractive." "You look cute." He shook his head. "No, beautiful the way you are." "That's sweet of you to say." Seeing how nervous he seemed, Karin took a moment to pull herself together. He had clearly done all of this to set a mood, but it was still something he didn't seem confident in. She couldn't let him think he'd done something wrong. "And you look handsome too, Naruto." "Ah, thanks." His shoulders relaxed, all the tension in his body growing slack. "I had a talk with Ayame a few days ago about how to set a date properly because I wanted to respond to what you told me, about being in love with me." Karin brushed her hair at that. "I didn't want you to feel pressured to answer that." "I know," he said, "but I want to. I want to tell you that I'm still learning what it means to know what it's like to love someone. I mean, I care about others a lot. If I can protect them, then I will even if it costs me my life. That's part of what I determined in the land of waves." She knew that much. It was part of why she cared so much for him. "But it's different with you," he continued, putting a hand over his heart. "When I'm with you, I feel, happy in a different way than when I'm with everyone else. And the thought of losing you and that happiness makes my heart feel heavy, so I'm scared that I'll make a mistake and endanger that." His words weighed on her heart in the opposite direction, making it feel lighter as her pulse quickened. She walked closer and reached out her hands, cupping his cheeks to gently straighten his head towards her. Then she leaned close until their foreheads were touching. "I feel the same way, Naruto," she told him. "It's confusing for me as well. I've never felt like this for anyone else, and I'm scared that I might do something to push you away. But it feels right for me, so I want to take it slow." "Me too," Naruto said, so close that his breath wafted against her skin. It was minty fresh, a detail she would normally overlook. But they were so close that Karin noticed not only his breath, but also how his skin also had a freshly washed scent to it and his eyes had a nervous glimmer in them. She found all of it cute and wondered how easy it would be to lean forward, tilt her head to the side slightly, and then kiss him like this. The stray thoughts led to her lips towards his, only for her to catch herself and twist his head to the side, just enough to instead kiss his cheek. Compared to kissing him on the lips again, it was probably the safer option since she didn't want to push him out of his comfort zone. Pulling back and clearing her throat as he blushed furiously, Karin then turned to the table and serving platter. "So what are we having for dinner?" "Looks like you didn't mess up," Sakura said as she watched them sit down to eat from her perch at the base of the tree, just outside of the area where she overlaid an external genjutsu over the surface of the lake in the training field. Next to her was a clone of Naruto, actively overseeing how the date was going. "Yeah," he said with a goofy grin as he rubbed his cheek where Karin kissed the original. "I was worried that I had made a mistake or something, but it looked like it worked out. Thanks for helping out." When Naruto had approached her and talked about what he had planned, Sakura found some hesitation in using her growing prowess with illusions in this manner. The false surroundings technique was simplistic in that it was only C-ranked, but it took some creativity and effort to get the image just right to make it look as well as it did. "I know you asked me to arrange for the illusion, but I still don't know how you set all this up," Sakura said. "Much less how you got a giant lily pad here for you to have the dinner on. Walk me through it." Well, I wanted to recapture how she taught me how to walk on water as part of my training, since it was a good memory, so I reserved the training field. Then there was the matter of getting something to eat on. I couldn't afford a boat, and using transformed clones was a risk since they could sink, plus I didn't want to burn chakra needlessly, so I called up Gamakichi and Gamatatsu for advice. "You mean the little toads that I see you with every now and again?" Sakura guessed. "Yeah, that's them. They managed to loan me one of Toad Boss' lily pads that he uses as a floating sake tray. Then there was dealing with any mosquitoes and bugs around, so I asked Ino for anything I can burn to keep them away since she knows about plants and stuff. As for dinner, Ayame had me go get the ingredients for a romantic meal and said she'd prepare it, so I picked up some pork, ginger, rice, curry, and some other stuff." "That does looks delicious," Sakura said as she observed the original removing the lid on the serving tray to show the dinner. It was pork cut into slices, glistening with some kind of sauce and layered with what looked to be some kind of grated herbs. Vegetables covered the side, and for dessert there looked to be a stack of sweets piled onto one another, with 2 cups between them. "Here," the clone said, setting down a sealing slip that released a second serving tray. He removed the lid to show it was a similar meal to what they were eating, if there was less of it. Ayame wanted to make sure I had enough so that the date went well, but I was afraid if we ate too much, then we'd have trouble skating on the water afterwards. "Thanks," she said as the scent of it enamored her. But before she could take a bite of anything, she froze as a thought came to mind. "Naruto, would you have gone this far for me before when you asked me out on a date all the time?" His face scrunched up in thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. "In all honesty, I would have shown you around and taken you to Ikaraku's for dinner. I didn't really get any of this stuff before now, or what it'd mean to really ask someone out until Ayame explained it to me. No wonder you were always upset when I asked. Part of that was me overreacting, Sakura said. I probably wouldn't have done any better, so seeing you pull something like this off actually surprises me with how mature you've gotten when it comes to this sort of thing. He nodded as he looked out to the original as he said something that made Karin laugh. I want to do this right, so I asked for help with things I didn't know rather than trying to do it all myself. His answer left Sakura feeling a bit envious there. This sort of setup was something that she used to picture doing with Sasuke not even a few months ago. But as time went on, Sakura saw him less as her ideal and more of the person he really was. And as much as she wanted to help him, like she was helping Naruto, he wouldn't let her. Naruto, have you seen Sasuke recently? She asked. No, I haven't, he said after some thought. He's probably mad since he's been stuck in the village all this time. When he gets like that, he doesn't like to be around others, so it makes sense we wouldn't see him wandering around the village. I just wish he'd let us help him, but he's really starting to act like he was before we were a team, Sakura said. It's only been a short time since then, it's felt like so much has changed. It'll be okay, Naruto's clone said. I promise, Sasuke will come around in time. Kakashi-sensei will probably be able to talk to him once he gets back, so don't worry about it so much. I guess you're right, she conceded. There was really nothing to be gained by worrying at the moment. That concern briefly shelved, she finally tasted the food that had been given to her and found it to be exquisite. I've got to ask for her for recipe to this. Kakashi felt his ears burning, not from his students talking, but from how dangerously close a stream of flames, so thick it was almost a solid object, slammed into the earthen wall he raised and lapped at the edges. It turns out the original location they had scouted out had been cleared out, barring moving corpses that had to be destroyed. But the move had been sudden enough that there was a trail his nindogs could follow, so they spent their time tracking it down given that they picked up Kabuto's scent. He figured they were on the right track when abominations burst out to greet them, monsters that were once men only to be warped by the cursed seal. As the flames refused to stop coming out, Kakashi made a set of hand seals and thrust his hand into the bulwark that he raised. It burst into shrapnel that speared forward and shredded holes in its body. The flames stopped long enough for him to swoop in with kunai in hand while streaming lightning chakra and cut off the transformed shinobi's head. Craning his head around, he watched as Guy slammed his foot into the chest of a tiger man, knocking it past another monstrosity that was impaled by wooden pikes spearing from the ground. His sharpened ears could make out the ribs being shattered and driven into his heart and lungs. The same thing happened to the last few they'd encountered, since Kabuto had apparently been handing them out to those who they couldn't give a cursed seal to, all in an effort to buy them time. It's open! Jiraiya shouted as he finished getting the door open into the base. He'd already turned the surrounding land into a nightmarish pit of mud just to make sure that anyone trying to escape through the ground would be trapped and drowned. Kakashi! Kakashi came over and revealed his Sharingan to survey the distance. Traps littered it, waiting to discharge and blow everyone who entered the walkway into pieces. Do we set them all off ahead of time or send in a decoy? We don't have time for that, Jiraiya said as he made hand seals and then slammed his hands into the walkway. The corridor transformed into the innards of a fire-breathing mountain toad, replacing the interior entirely and whatever traps were in the way to hinder them. I've made it so that we can walk through while everyone else inside will be trapped. Let's go. The four-man team pressed on through the corridor, circumventing the traps by Jiraiya literally reshaping the terrain until they came to a wide open room that was untouched by the time-space technique. Candles burned on pillars that lined the spacious room, casting an ominous glow over the seat at the back. That's where Orochimaru sat, fingers laced and hiding his smile as he looked at the four. His shadow was cast deep from his chair. Jiraiya, I've been waiting for you. So you really were back, Jiraiya said as he stepped forward, eyes narrowing and fist balling up in anger. You should have stayed dead. Come now, we both know that my return was inevitable. He rose from the seat. I have transcended such a petty thing as death. All you've done is set me back by a few months or years at the most, but I have all the time in the world. Try all you like, but I will return again and again until I fulfill my... Wooden spears curved from behind Jiraiya, stemming from Tenzo's outstretched palm to impale the snake Sannin as he spoke. At the same time, Kakashi and Guy had moved with body flickers to come in from the right and left. Between the wooden spikes from the front, the kunai streaming lightning chakra from the right, and the sweeping foot carrying enough momentum to shatter his skull from the left, it should have been enough to kill him 3 times over. Yet they were all rebuked by wooden pikes that came from his shadow and formed a wall around Orochimaru as he stood there, an unmoving smirk visible on his face. Water followed, a powerful stream that took the shape of a serpentine dragon breaking through the wood, and then circling around with its maw open to shatter the offending wooden spikes like toothpicks and drive away the attackers before spearing towards them all. Tenzo wrapped them in a dome of thick wood that weathered the rushing water until the dragon lost its cohesion and shattered. He then split the dome in half to clear their line of sight, and it revealed Orochimaru standing where he did before with 2 other figures that were unmistakable. After all, who wouldn't recognize the first 2 Hokage of their village? I shattered their coffins during the exams, so that should have destroyed them, Jiraiya said through gritted teeth. You may have stopped their resurrection during the finals, but those were merely vessels sacrificed to house the souls of these 2, Orochimaru said as he produced 2 kunai from behind his back with tags on them. As long as I have their genetic material and their souls can be reached, I can bring them back over and over. You always have to play God, don't you? Jiraiya asked. Stealing bodies, trying to burn down the village that you were born in, denying the dead their final rest. You're never content with just leaving things the way they should be, and you don't care who you hurt in the end. Of course, I wouldn't be a man of science otherwise, Orochimaru said. Those that fail to ascend their limitations will wither and die. Only those willing to break free of the natural order and such things as morals will truly make any sort of progress. But enough talk. He stabbed the kunai into the back of the first and second Hokage's heads and gave the order. Kill them all. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for the battlefield to be completely reshaped. In the first second, the first Hokage wordlessly slammed his hands into the ground as the second Hokage used a single-hand seal. In the second, Tenzo encased their group in a wooden sphere of protection as the world around them trembled in warning. And in the third, the walls that made up the underground base were torn apart from the inside out as invasive roots took hold while water burst from the air, combining to unleash the wrath of nature. The wooden shell cracked and splintered loudly, straining to avoid being crushed as the shinobi that crafted it braced the sides and gritted his teeth. Then it stopped seconds later. Silence ensued until Tenzo split the shell's casing in half for them to escape, now that the roots that sprang up from below had stopped trying to entwine it and violently crush them to death. They vacated it and landed on the first sylvan footing they could find, only to see that the muddy landscape surrounding the base, which had been warped by Jiraiya's swamp of the underworld initially, had been even further twisted from its natural state. It was now filled with murky water that thinned the mud and hardy trees that rose up at the former Hokage's techniques. Even the air was tinged with the scent of decaying matter, adding to the illusion that it had been an old locale forged through nature and time, rather than something crafted within the span of 10 minutes by men or undead men, to be specific. The sight would have been stolen the breath of average shinobi, and in that moment of doing so, they would have been killed as skewer-thin streams of water speared from the swamp with a rapid spin meant to drill through them. But as none of the gathered shinobi were average, they eluded the skewering drills that bore cleanly into the thick branches they were perched on and sprung into combat. Kakashi revealed his inherited Sharingan as he landed on the water's surface and the Tomo spun to life. The flow of chakra revealed before him allowed him to avoid the needles of water that sprung from the murky depths with well-timed leaps before rushing towards where second Hokage was hidden behind a Genjutsu atop the water. Engaging the revenant with kunai in hand, he refused to give him an inch to make another hand seal. At the same time, Might Guy's muscles felt a familiar strain as the gates of opening and healing opened at once to empower him against the first Hokage. The flood of chakra that surged through his body allowed for him to land a fierce kick that slammed into the undead cage's chest and sent him skirting across the water and into one of his own trees. Bindings of wood then coiled around him as Tenzo came from behind, pinning him into place for Guy to land a stronger blow. They didn't last a second, as the first Hokage tensed his muscle and broke free, meeting Guy's flying kick with his palm to stop it. He then grabbed hold of his ankle and slammed him into the tree hard enough to break it in half. Guy gritted his teeth before opening the gate of life and pain, using the further bolstered strength to pull his leg free and tear off the Revenant's arm in the process. He then slammed his fist into the first Hokage's face and the Revenant went sailing back, only to be struck again from behind and be sent flying forward. Then he was struck from the side by a green blur, then from the bottom, and then from the top. Over and over, Might Guy struck from all angle with hammer-like blows before he struck downwards a final time. The blow carried enough force that the moment the first Hokage's body hit the water it ruptured from the impact. The Revenant hit the bottom of the swamp and created a deep depression, broken and battered. Then the water rushed back inwards, obscuring him from sight. It was seemingly over until wooden spears rose from beneath the surface. Guy avoided them, but was caught as the first Hokage appeared behind him and lashed out with a kick that would have shattered a lesser man's spine. Guy bore with it as he landed on the water's surface and then struck back just as hard. With the two undead Hokage occupied, only Orochimaru and Jiraiya were left to fight alone. The resurrected Snake Sannin, using the body of his former apprentice, drew a katana from inside of his mouth and brought it around for Jiraiya's head. The Toad Sage deflected it with the use of a kunai in one hand before bringing his leg up and thrusting it forward like a spear. The bottom of his wooden sandals smashed into the slender body and would have caved in Orochimaru's chest if he hadn't jumped back with the blow. Jiraiya then spun around so that his long mane of hair was facing his former teammate and sent his chakra into it. The hair strands went rigid as the chakra hardened them into needles. Then he jettisoned them forward in a deathly spray. There was no dodging it. Even going under the murky water would simply result in the needles skewering him from above. So instead Orochimaru exhaled after filling his lungs with wind chakra and bellowed out a gale that sent the ivory needles flying back. Jiraiya countered the C-rank technique by spinning around while forming hand seals and unleashing a flame technique of the same rank. The moment the flames met the wind, they swelled and turned into a raging inferno that would have swallowed Orochimaru whole if he didn't drop down into the water. Even then, steam filled the section of the swamp they were in as the flames evaporated the water. Charred trees caught in its wake smoldered and collapsed into the depths, hindering any attempt to listen for his movements in the water. Feeling the wet heat condense against his skin, Jiraiya abandoned the use of his eyes to instead clasp his hands together as though to pray, releasing a translucent dome that expanded around him. The expanding barrier allowed him to detect the presence of others within it, regardless of what method Orochimaru used to hide. Sure enough, it quickly caught up to Orochimaru's presence beneath the water. At the same time, he felt a large figure rushing towards him from that direction and barely had time to leap up before the surface of the water was broken. It was a large snake summoning, mouth gaping wide and ready to swallow him whole. Unable to waste time with it, Jiraiya spat out as much toad oil as he could down its throat and then followed it up with an explosive tag. The flames that were born from within swallowed the serpent whole as the Toad Sage landed and then clasped his hands again to reactivate the detection barrier. Orochimaru was moving again above the water's surface. Jiraiya couldn't let the man get away again, so naturally he gave chase with the intention of using a sealing scroll he'd prepared just for Orochimaru, under the assumption that he had become weaker after changing bodies. Anko's body may have been compatible, but completely transferring your soul and chakra to someone else just had to have a drawback somewhere. He redoubled his efforts as they approached the edge of the swamp, only for Orochimaru to look over his shoulder at Jiraiya. And in that brief moment, the Toad Sage caught the faintest hint of a smirk on his face. It set off alarms in his head and made him reconsider what he was doing. Orochimaru was a slippery snake because he was cautious. Jiraiya had chased the man for a long time now, and it was only by hiding his presence and letting the snake Sannin be caught by surprise that they'd managed to face one another in the village. Even then, they used the element of surprise and his own barrier to kill him. So why did this feel wrong? I'm missing something, he realized. There had to be a reason that Orochimaru was running away. He had to have been waiting for them. But why was that the case? If he was weakened, why wait for them to arrive when he could have slipped away sooner? Did he intend to use the first and second Hokage to kill them after he left the expendable ones to soften them up? If that was the case, he could have just left them there and given them the order to attack on sight. Not wait until they entered the room. Unless… Damn it! Jiraiya skid to a stop as the pieces fit together and created a shadow clone to remain behind while he rushed back into the swamp. The clone glared at the figure of Orochimaru as he stood there. A shadow clone? The snake Sannin shook his head. I'm a little insulted. Drop the act, the clone said. You're not him, despite playing the part. If I had to guess, you're that brat he keeps around Kabuto. A look of brief surprise crossed Orochimaru's face. It then warped into an amused smile. And here I thought that I had imitated him perfectly. Then again, Lord Orochimaru warned me that you wouldn't be fooled for long. I have to ask, what gave it away? Orochimaru knows when to go to ground, and he wouldn't be sitting on a throne waiting for us to come to him unless he thought he could take us all. You did this to buy time for him, and if you've taken after him, then you're not really here as well. Probably one of his expendable flunkies you've rendered brain dead and turned into a puppet or something. In my defense, the corpse had been prepared for some time now, and I simply put it use. Nevertheless, my task has been complete. The first and second Hokage have been set to kill all of you. Should they lose track of you, they will then go on to attack the village, and the only way to release the technique is if Lord Orochimaru deems to. It is our victory. That said, the modified corpse gave a bow to the shadow clone. Then it immediately exploded as the clone rushed in to at least wipe it off the face of the planet. Thus both facsimiles of the combatants were removed from the battle. The original Jiraiya gritted his teeth in anger as he inherited the memories from the clone. Again, Orochimaru had made fools of them and would escape reprisal for now. He was always one step ahead, getting away with causing pain to others, and it infuriated Jiraiya. But he grounded his anger. Pushed it aside as he grabbed hold of the scroll meant to seal away Orochimaru AMD, made his way towards where the fighting continued. It could still be used if he repurposed it. Ruwa, the train of thought, was scattered by the thunderous shrieking of dragons. 4 of them roared at the top of their lungs, manifestations of the water dragon and wood dragon techniques brought forth by the undead pair of Hokage and Tenzo with Kakashi. Coiling their serpentine bodies around one another, they battled by snapping their jaws in a contest of power as they tore one another apart. While they were preoccupied, Might Guy appeared in a blur through the opening with his nunchucks chambered. The moment he swung them both, the Revenant's entire upper bodies were gone from the sheer force of the impact backed by 4 gates. He swung again to scatter the lower halves of their bodies as well, and then leapt back towards the others as Jiraiya arrived. Lord Jiraiya, did you apprehend Orochimaru? Guy asked, his skin red as blood pumped through his body at an accelerated pace under the 4th gate's opening. That wasn't him. It was a distraction. A grimace that matched the notable disdain in his voice formed on his face as he watched the Revenants begin to reform themselves. Right now we need to stop these 2, or they'll go on to destroy the village. Easier said than done, sir, Kakashi said. They're closer to machines rather than living beings. However, they merely reconstitute themselves and continue to attack when killed. Our best option would likely to be seal them away. I can use the sealing scroll I prepared for Orochimaru. he said as the two finished reforming. Tenzo, I'll need you to make a coffin just big enough to fit both of them. Guy, Kakashi, pin them down for a second. Sir, they all responded at once. Then there was no more room for discussion after that as the two undead Hokage began their attack again. And this time they escalated even further. The second Hokage began to exhale a powerful stream of water in front of him that broke the surface of the murky swamp and then began to churn it violently into an expanding, spiraling wall that threatened to sweep them away. Their primary means of escape was cut off, as well as a wooden wall emerged around them to form a dome that blotted out the moonlight and encased them in darkness. It was a combination attack meant to grind them into a smear against the wooden cage, while the two behind it remained protected within the eye of the hurricane. With no hesitation, the elites of the Leaf Village acted. To meet the combined efforts of two of their village's greatest shinobi, even as shades of themselves raised from the dead, they held nothing back. Might Guy opened up the 5th, 6th, and 7th gates, while Kakashi's mirror wheel I warped into its kaleidoscopic form. Chakra and sweat bloomed in the form of a magnificent green aura that threatened to overtake them all as it displaced the water that steadily grated at it. Guy took on a stance with his fist chambered back and tensed his muscles, prepared to release it. At the same time, Kakashi swiveled around and then fixated his eye on the wooden dome encasing them. Everything at the center of his view began to distort as he used it as a lens and pushed out all the chakra he could to force Kamui to activate, doing his best to ignore the sensation that was like getting a kunai plunging through his eye and into his skull. Space warped and was drawn into itself to create a perfectly shaped hole as Kakashi then passed out, blood trailing from his eye. Jiraiya caught hold of him and then rushed out of the hole with Tenzo, leaving Guy behind. The moment they were cleared, Tenzo encased them in another shell of protection as thick as he could and forced it as deep as he could into the ground, so they were out of the blast zone as Guy unleashed a single punch as fast as he could. And the daytime tiger burst the wooden cage. It was confined within a part. The pressure expanded to where it caught the entirety of the swamp and leveled it from the sheer force of the blow. Nothing remained but an expansive crater the size of a lake as Might Guy landed, unharmed but sweat glistening from his brow. Every bone in his body was rattling from the shockwave, and the strain of the chakra that threaded every inch of his being tore apart his muscle fibers. The fight was out of him for the time being, leaving him to watch as the two revenants began to reform right in front of him. That was when two wooden halves emerged from the ground beneath them and snapped shut like the jaws of a shark, sealing them inside. The shell that had been buried within the earth popped out and split open so that Tenzo could thrust his hand into the coffin snare he created, warping his fingers to form wooden bands to wrap around it. "Now," he said, straining as he wrestled control over the wood against the first Hokage. "Do it now." Jiraiya unfurled the scroll with a sharp motion using his left hand as he bit into his right thumb. He then ran his finger along the scroll to mark it with his blood before he formed a one-handed gesture and spoke with chakra threading his voice to activate it. "Let the evil be sealed within." The words carried his intention as the unfurled scroll wrapped around the coffin like a winding serpent. Sealing script on the paper bled off of it, the ink running over the coffin and impressing upon it a central sealing sigil that was bordered by dozens of lines that ran both vertically and horizontally over the wood. The struggle stopped the moment it was done, and the sealing script shone with a purple haze as it drank in his chakra until there was little to give. "It's done," Jiraiya said, sighing with a shuddering breath as chakra exhaustion was on the verge of setting in. "That's a multi-layered seal, packed with everything that I thought would be useful for dealing with Orochimaru. It's meant to contain a soul, also paralyzing that within it under an intensified gravity field and let no chakra in or out. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out without my doing so." "As expected of you, Lord Jiraiya," Guy said wearily, lacking the usual energy in his voice. "What, next?" "By now the snake will have gone to ground," he said. "Until he makes his next move or we find another lead, we head back to the village and have the old man seal this coffin away somewhere no one can reach it." Back in the Leaf Village, unaware of his mentor's struggles, Naruto slowly had Suzaku descend outside of Karin's house. It had gotten later than they expected after they had finished dinner and dancing on the water's surface. But all good things had to come to an end, and keeping Sakura all night to refresh the illusion would have been selfish. Speaking of Sakura, his clone was in the process of escorting her home. The clone had created another clone to send the memories to him mid-flight and allowed him to recall what the pair had discussed, including the fact that Sasuke was being distant again. While his clone had said to leave it to Kakashi, he should probably look into it on his own since, even if he was a Chunin now, they were still part of the same team, and the fact that she shared that information with him meant that she was really worried. He'd also have to really thank Ayame for everything. She'd want to know how the date went, and he felt like he owed her for the food and the advice. Oh, and because Sakura wanted the recipe for what she had made for dinner. Once Suzaku landed, Naruto once again helped her down from atop of it. Only this time a giggle tickled his ears instead of a surprised yelp. It matched the bright smile on Karin's face as she looked him in the eyes. "That was so much fun," she said, folding her hands together behind her back. "I didn't expect something like that. You really put a lot of work into it." Naruto grinned brightly at that. "Glad you enjoyed it. Now I've got to think of something to return the favor." She placed her hands on her chin in thought. "You've set the bar pretty high, so it'll have to be something really special. It'll take me some time to figure out what to do." "You don't need to. It's just—" His words died as Karin leaned in to kiss him once again. This time it was on the lips, a feather-soft touch that blossomed in his mind like fireworks. There was no single word to describe it. It was hot as the sun, yet it was sweet as honey, a delightful feeling that robbed him of the ability to think as the kiss lingered for what seemed to be a lifetime. Then she pulled away with a blush on her cheeks that matched the one that painted Naruto's, both a deep shade of red that was the same as her hair. "I know I don't have to, Naruto," she said afterwards, brushing her hair back awkwardly. "But I want to. Because if I do my best and it makes you happy, then I'll be happy too. That's what I want our relationship to be like, where we're happy because we make one another happy. Don't you?" Lost for words, Naruto nodded dumbly. "Anyway, we have a big day tomorrow at the Ceiling R&D building." Karin opened her door. "I'll see you there, okay?" He was still lost for words until Suzaku prodded him with its beak to snap him out of his stupor. "Right, see you then. Have a good night." "You too, Naruto." She gave him a wave before shutting the door gently. Naruto stood there for a moment longer to center himself. He vigorously shook his head to clear it of the warm haze that loitered with memories of the kiss as he climbed onto Suzaku's back to little avail. The cool night air as it flew back towards his home did a much better job of sobering him up as he headed back towards his apartment.
Well, that will be all for part 9. Thank you for watching, and again, check out the author of this story in the description. Like or share so other people can see this story or the video.